I'm glad to be here. Let me just correct a couple things. I'm not an expert in gangs. I am a student of the gang problem. I am an expert in police reform. I've sued enough police departments all over this country, and I will take a great deal of catalytic credit for changing the relationship and dynamic with LAPD. So I am an expert in police reform, but I'm not an expert in gangs. But I know enough about gangs to call Georgia Leap and say, cancel your Thanksgiving plans because we've got a big fat report we've got to do. What I want to do is I'm going to give you an overview, and I want to give you, kind of paint the layers of complexity of how you approach a complex social, political, economic, anthropological problem like gangs. And how Georgia and I and a whole team of people from academe, from the legal community, from cops, the cops I used to sue, to epidemiologists. Georgia, of course, is key because she's one of the few people, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a gang anthropologist until I met Georgia. And you have to have people who are willing to scale K2 with no oxygen tanks, and that's what it takes to take on a large-scale, epidemic-level problem. And so I just want to kind of say a couple of things about the role of universities. The great thing about Georgia is that she's not an academic. She's a social change agent. And she has the graduate degrees and she teaches, but she looks at you as deployable army members, okay? And so, you know, and she's given decades to this problem. We're both so old it's getting scary. And we've been at this way too long. But you need to think about why you're getting these degrees, and the fact that you're at UCLA and that UCLA is in the gang capital of the country. We may actually be the gang capital. We may actually be the gang capital if you just count the numbers of gangs and gang members. Certainly in the first world, we're the gang capital of the first world. We can't say we're the gang capital of the world because there are third world countries that have a much deeper and broader problem. Why focus on gangs? I am a civil rights lawyer. And I was winning all of my cases, of course, because I'm a good, I'm a damn good civil rights lawyer. And I don't lose. That's why Chief Parks didn't want me in the room. The other reason is that I had to make sure he didn't get a second appointment as chief, but that's another mini-series. Once I decide, you gotta go, you gotta go. So, as a civil rights lawyer, why wasn't I doing voting rights and environmental justice cases where kids are exposed to lead poisoning? We were doing, well, I got here in LA and I started out at UCLA working for Assistant Vice Chancellor Tom Lifka and Winston Dobie. I mean, this is the last century. You all were probably just being born. But when I got here, I didn't know anything about gangs. It looks very peaceful, palm trees, sunshine, you know, it's gorgeous. I had no idea that I was in the gang capital of the country and possibly the first world. And when I went back to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, we are impact litigators, which means we're systems change litigators. We don't just file a case to keep somebody from being evicted. We don't do one-on-one legal services. We use litigation, impact litigation, class actions to force policy changes. That's the kind of litigator that I am. We're after systems change and we're there to solve problems. It's an alternative policy-making vehicle. You do it through the law. When the politicians are stuck on stupid, or because we run our politics like an escort service on our way to becoming a brothel, they're not interested in solving problems. They're not interested in finding a solution. They're interested in their next office. And so because our public policy problem-solving apparatus is broken, you have to find other vehicles to kind of ram through the Humvee to get into the castle and make the king take notice, right? Well, litigation does that. So litigation is one tool that you can use. And the NAACP Legal Defense Fund pioneered that kind of work, obviously, by ending apartheid in this country with Brown v. Board of Ed. I was, what, 2 years old? I told you how old I am. So as a civil rights lawyer, what I was doing is we were winning all of our cases, be it the MTA bus riders case, be it You know, a big class action forcing the sheriffs to stop beating people with rubber hoses in the back of the Linwood station. You know, all kinds of employment law cases, going after the police for excessive force and so forth. We were doing what civil rights lawyers do. And civil rights lawyers are supposed to make the promise of the Constitution a reality for everybody, and we are supposed to protect and vindicate people's civil rights. Pretty simple, right? Well, we were winning our cases, but we were sending our clients back home to areas where the kids couldn't walk to school, where their children weren't safe in the hallways, not just because of gangs, but because there was chronic exposure to violence. We were winning our cases, but we were sending our clients home to a losing proposition for advancement. They were not going to find opportunity. The educational systems didn't work. You know the story. Just watch The Wire. You'll get a picture. Okay? Am I kind of sort of up to date? I know it was canceled. I actually know it was canceled. Or they don't do it anymore. The Wire should be fiction, but it isn't. Okay? The Wire doesn't even begin to capture the worst of the hot zones in LA. And so I began to realize that without safety, there are no civil rights. Why is a civil rights lawyer doing this? Because without freedom from violence, there are no other freedoms. Without the right to be safe, there are no other rights. And because our Constitution was written by property-owning and slave-owning wealthy white men, they forgot to include the right to eat, the right to shelter, but they forgot to include the first right. They kind of sort of got it with the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but they didn't make that a right. That's in the preface, you know. But it's a winning credo of this country. But when you talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's fine to have a First Amendment, but you can't talk very well if you're dead. So before the First Amendment, the right to speak, the right to association, the right to freedom of religious association, you've got to have the right to safety. What do you think we're doing in Afghanistan and Iraq? We're providing the first right, safety, and that creates the political room. So that's how a civil rights lawyer gets into this. Well, right after the Rodney King riots, I hope you folks have heard of the Rodney King riots. I mean, I hope you're not that young. But right after the Rodney King riots, I realized I had not been down to the housing projects, and so I, front court, if you can believe it, in a St. John's suit, Ferragamo pumps, and more pearls than Barbara Bush. I actually got in a car and went down to Jordan Downs housing project because I heard that, number one, we just gone through the right. I had just gotten to LA and the LDF office, and I said, I haven't even been down to the housing projects. We had a riot. Let me figure out what's going on in the underclass areas. And so I go down there from federal court, looking ridiculous in this outfit, get out and join Mercedes Marquez, and there was a gym full of women, and long story short, the women asked us to help our men. They said, the only thing you can do for us is help our men do the gang truce. I said, what's the gang truce? They said, well, the blood bounty hunters of Nickerson Gardens and the Grape Street Crips of Jordan Downs housing project have been at war, and they're in a crack war, and we have to put our kids to bed in bathtubs because the bullets are coming through the walls. We need you to, the only way you can help us, lady, you light, bright, damn near white lawyer, exactly what she called me, and I'm used to that, because she's a potential client. I said, yes, ma'am, how do I help? And she said, you go help our men do the gang truce. Well, what do I know about a gang truce? That's not what they teach in law school. But these were the women saying the only way you can help us is to help our men reduce the violence. That's how I got the violence reduction mission handed to me. So I said, where are they? You know, how do I wouldn't, you know a bunch of, where are they negotiating this thing? It's obviously not the UN. So they said they're out in a trailer in the back of Markham. So I take my St. John's knit suit, Ferragamo, briefcase carrying self, and I knock on this portable trailer like an idiot, and this guy opens it, you know, he's got the red bandana tied around his head, and he just looks at me and said, hi, my name's Connie Rice, I'm a civil rights lawyer, is there anything I can do to help you guys? He slams the door in my face, as he should have, and I know I looked ridiculous to them, and then 5 minutes later, not 5 minutes, but 3 minutes later, I hear them talking, and he opens it back up, and when he opens the door up, it's a trailer packed with these beefy guys on both sides. They've got their colors wrapped around their biceps and their heads, and so, you know, it looks like a festoon of Halloween costumes or something with all the, you know, like they're flags. They're wearing their colors. And I'm looking, and so the red was on the left, and on the right, and the blue was on the left, and they were just following up. The truce had already been negotiated. They were trying to figure out how to enforce it. And so one of them pipes up and says, "Are you a lawyer?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, one way you could help us is, can you get us that agreement between the Arabs and the Jews?" And I said, "Would you be referring to the Egyptian Sinai Peace Accords?" He said, "Yeah, that one." They wanted the Sinai Peace Accords because they said, if the Jews and the Arabs can figure out how to do peace, we can do it. And that was how I got started. And that was my journey into gangland. At the same time, I was suing cops. So I had a journey through copland and a journey through gangland. Gangs are, in some ways, the way not to focus, okay? We have to pay attention to them directly because they are a vector for violence. They can create mayhem. They are, the thing that fascinated me was that the physics in these hot zones, the police call them kill zones. They are areas where the only amendments to the Constitution that are operating, I think, are the Second Amendment, because everybody has a gun. But there's no First Amendment. There's no Fourth Amendment. Eighth Amendment you can forget, but of course that takes state action. You know, there's just no 14th Amendment, there's no due process, there's no equal protection. The cops have created a police state because we've told them, you make sure you contain the violence in these poorer areas. We have a suppression containment policing model. And so when you have neglected areas where government does not work and where norms, middle-class norms, don't operate, what you create is not just a constitution-free zone, you also create the petri dish that allows the alternative expressions of power. And that's what a gang is. It's an alternative expression of power, and it is a reaction to emasculation, exclusion, and a whole bunch of other dumb things that we do when we lock folks away from real opportunity and safety. Okay? Doesn't excuse any of the violence. Believe me, I've been around gangsters long enough. I don't excuse any of the violence. It's not about excusing it, or it's not about hug a thug. It's not about that. It's about strategically analyzing what are the sociological, economic, political, legal dynamics, the cultural and anthropological dynamics that create these conditions and that create this phenomenon. You need to analyze it. Don't have to agree with it, but you need the anthropological eye. I had to put away my litigation eye, which is a warrior's eye, because litigation is nothing but war with paper. I had to put that away and understand why this phenomenon exists, why it's growing, why it's metastasizing, so that then I can figure out the strategy to roll it back. You can't fix something that you don't understand down to the DNA. You've got to drill down to the DNA for all, and you've got to use the different lenses that you're taught with the liberal arts education. The anthropological eye ended up being the most useful to me at that point, and then the public health eye. Georgia and I work with Billy Weiss, who helped to pioneer the notion of treating violence as a disease and going after it with a vector-controlled public health model, which is where we are now. So when I started, it was really just, okay, who are these guys? Why do they operate this way? What are they doing? After going through the county process of dealing with gang intervention, which is ex-gangsters who, for a number of different reasons, decide they actually want to become part of the violence reduction strategy. Most of them have come to a point in their lives where they're scared for their kids, or some of the gangsters who did the truce were really doing it because they just wanted a little bit more stability to be able to apply their drug trade and do the other illegal activities that could bring in money. A few of them, about probably 0.1% of the so-called gang intervention workers, a few of them actually do it out of atonement and a need to pay back for the damage that they did. And those are the ones that Georgia and I are interested in. I worked with gang intervention for a long period of time because it was a good way to get into the outer reaches of that world. It was a good way to sit through their meetings. It was a good way to learn how they thought. It was a good way to see what made up the dynamics of a truce. It was my education on the ground. I needed to understand, how did they take over the hotspots? By the time Martin Ludlow became a councilman, and there was an ad hoc committee, LA has 1,000 gangs, perhaps 100,000 gang members. It depends on how you count, but it's between 60,000 and 100,000. We have what we call an epidemic. We don't just have an epidemic of gangs, we have an epidemic of gang violence. We've had a 20-year epidemic of youth gang homicide. Let me say that again, a 20-year epidemic of youth gang homicide that recently receded down to the low levels of the epidemic. When you have an epidemic of youth gang homicide, it means that you have, our kids were killing each other at such a rate that epidemiologists rated it at a very high level of epidemic. That's pretty startling. You have a gang culture epidemic. Gang culture is now becoming synonymous with youth culture. So it wasn't just that you had gangs. You had several different kinds of epidemics, and what I was interested in was, what should we be focusing on? We studied, when I picked up the phone and called Georgia and I said, we got to do this report. There was an RFP put out, and basically the city said, can you get a group of scholars together and tell us why, after 25 years of a war on gangs, we don't seem to be getting anywhere. And so we were hired, my group, the Advancement Project, was hired to pull together a bunch of experts. Georgia was probably the second or third call I made. But we called gang intervention, we called cops, I called Wes McBride, Detective George, I can't remember what his rank is because I'm old. But we called the people, the cops we'd sued, and Wes McBride said, I don't even like you, Connie, but I'm going to help you because I'm getting ready to retire in a month, and I just arrested the grandson of the man I first arrested 2 weeks out of the Sheriff's Academy. And I arrested his dad 10 years ago. We've decimated 3 generations of this family. They're all gang members, and we haven't changed a damn thing. So Wes McBride joined us. We had other ex-gang cops join us. We had teachers, but most importantly, we pulled together the public health experts, the epidemiologists. Why? Because cops didn't have the answer. We had a 25-year war on gangs. This region has spent $25 billion for 28 years of war on gangs. We have 6 times as many gangs and at least double the gang members, probably triple at this point. If you spend $25 billion on something and you have 6 times as much of it, at the end of the day, I think you have to conclude you failed. Okay? You got to get a new playbook. All right? So our big report, we brought all these experts together. If you bring lawyers and mix them with PhDs, street HDs, and cops, you're going to get a 1,000-page report. So Georgia and Billy and a whole bunch of range of experts, with Susan Lee, my right brain and left brain, the lawyer I hired to help me run the urban peace docket that we have at the Advancement Project, my organization, we produced a report that answered the question, why is LA stuck on stupid when it comes to gangs? And we basically said, with our cop friends as allies, always get your opponents to be your allies. Unlikely allies give you a lot more political sway and power. You don't have to sue people for 15 years. That's just my way of doing it. We produced this analysis that said, your current gang programs can't possibly work. They don't have the scale, they don't address the intensity, they don't address the complexity of the gang problem. You have a whack-a-mole strategy of arresting the same gangsters over and over and over again, and you are not doing anything to change the conditions that spawn the violence, the conditions that spawn the culture, the mindset, the outlook of the gangster realm. And you also aren't doing anything to change the conditions in the community at an ecosystem level so that the gang power and influence doesn't expand. Go down to Jordan Downs and ask the boys why they want to join Grape Street. Number one, they'll tell you they don't have a choice, because Grape Street actually forces you to join. There are gangs that don't. But the number 2 reason is that the only men in the community who have women, cars, and money are gangsters. So it becomes the only way that males can get power and status and some control over their environment. And that means you have a cultural epidemic that has a hold on the community. When you go into these zones, the gangs control the parks, many other public spaces, swimming pools, parks. You go into the gang zones, the hot zones, you'll find gang recruiters in the hallways. Go down to Hollenbeck High School, I can show you the 18th Street recruiters who are recruiting people in the hallways. When you go into a gang zone, you don't control the housing projects. The residential housing managers will tell you, in order to use the Grape Street gym, you don't ask the housing manager, you ask Grape Street. Because they still control 25% of that housing project. Now, it's gotten better because when I started out that day, when I was knocking on the, the portable, the gang juice guys, they controlled 75% of Jordan Downs. It's receded, but the problem has morphed. In that 20 years, you now have a gang epidemic that ends up actually controlling the norms of that community. People from that community have to respond to the gang. Kids can't walk to school safely. The gangs collect taxes. You could see them with clipboards going up and down Broadway, and if they're part of Florencia 13, which is a Latino gang, they're collecting taxes. And we can't do anything to stop it because we can't protect the business owners. So just understand the extent of the control, the span of control. Understand how they're managed. Now, why are they like? Because we're not there. We're not providing a strong enough set of alternatives, a strong enough framework of governance that they have faith that we'll be. We pack up our briefcases and leave before dark, and then the gang is there 24/7, right? Does this sound familiar, what we're doing in Afghanistan and Iraq? Okay. Because it sounds familiar, not just because my cousin came up with Clear Hole to Build, but we came out of that report saying the public health wraparound model, if you wrap the community in a safety net and are there 24/7, and you have lots of rich activities, you employ people, you build the community up so that it is inoculated against the virus of the gang. Think about it as public health. What did our public health instructors tell us? The epidemiologist said, treat the violence, focus on the violence, not the gang, because if you focus on the gang, you just up the status of the gang. Oh, we're so bad, they've got to do a war on us, and then it actually creates more recruitment for street gangs, okay? Not for prison gangs and not for organized crime cartels. Those are hierarchical and they are organized to make money out of crime. We're talking about street gangs, hardcore street gangs that have an identity with the community and their turf, right? They're more about belonging. They're more about an alternative social construct. They're more about creating a family of terrorists, but a family nonetheless. It works for them, right? And so yes, crime is part of it, but that's not their main reason for existence. That's not what they're organized to do. As Greg Boyle says, they're more disorganized crime, not organized crime. So for hardcore street gangs, you don't attack the gang. It actually increases the status and makes them more attractive and expands the attraction to the culture. So when Georgia and we, Billy, and all of us put together that report, we said, number one, move to the epidemiological model, framework. Do the public health model. Do a vector control model. What happens with that? Take malaria as an example. Malaria, you have a malaria epidemic, do you hand out fly swatters and do one mosquito at a time? Guess what? You're all going to be dead if you do that. Okay? When you have an epidemic, you need to do the following. You've got to make sure that the epidemic can't proceed. You have to stop the progression of the disease, right? So you're after norm change in the population so that the population's behavior doesn't incubate, transmit, and reinfect everybody, right? So the epidemiologists are trying to understand how do we block the creation of more of the disease and the transmission of more of the disease. Well, if you treat violence in the same way, and we did. Now, so what do? Norm change, what does that mean? It means the kids now know not to go out without insecticide on. You train the community to sleep under insecticide-doused nets. You train the community to empty standing bodies of water, right? You make sure that there are no reproductive areas for the mosquitoes, no water that they need, cut off their food supply. You go after, it's a vector control. Every vector that makes that disease transmissible, you block it. Georgia has an excellent analogy as well. If you have cancer, it's not just enough to do the surgery. Because if you do the surgery without the radiation, without the follow-up chemotherapy, without the support networks that keep you psychologically whole, without changing your diet, you have to change the patient's norms. You can't just cut out the surgery, otherwise the cancer comes right back. So the public health model that Georgia and Billy Weiss and I and our whole team, including the cops said we can't arrest our way out of this. Suppression alone is not enough. We came up with this public health model, and we had to sell it to the city. We're still in the process of doing that. The county is AWOL. They don't get it. We're going to have to come at them with another army. But the bottom line is that report changed the physics and the thinking about gangs. The city of Los Angeles is the gang capital of the country, but they've never had a gang czar. They've never had an office that focuses on gangs. Because of that report, we've had 2 gang czars. The current one is a jazz musician who is just a genius. He's a Cuban immigrant. He's amazing. He can bridge both the African culture and the Latino cultures. And he's been brilliant. And let me tell you what, he took our report. And out of our report we said, take back your parks, do a wraparound, start there. How many of you heard of the Summer Night Lights Parks program? A few of you. Okay, more than just a few of you. Probably because Georgia told you. But Summer Night Lights is a mini version of what Georgia and Billy and our co-authors in the report, a call to action, the case for comprehensive solutions to LA's gang epidemic. You can tell we're not PR people. We said, organize government, organize children, organize the community to get all hands on deck, everybody in the boat together across the sectors, business, faith-based, youth culture, schools, from the institutional level all the way across to the individual human being level. I work at the systems change level, Greg Boyle works at the individual human being level. But you've got to have us all linked together in order to make the impact that I'm talking about. So Summer Night Lights came out of a Summer of Success program that we documented in our report. And we said, when Martin Ludlow did his 24/7, know where every kid is, he had 5 warring gangs. The summer before, they had 17 shootings. They had gang rapes. The youth crime was off the scales. We surrounded that area 24/7. He even had me out there coaching basketball. I said, I haven't played basketball since 1970. I said, get a grip. He said, just put a whistle on and call foul every now and then. So you know it's desperate when you got me out there coaching basketball. We had midnight basketball, midnight soccer, midnight chess. We had midnight swim team. The churches cooked and gave the kids clothes. We knew where every kid in that neighborhood was, just like they do in middle-class communities. First we had to negotiate with the gangs. Our gang intervention guys went in there and said to the gangsters, what do you need for us to do this park program? We want to do this summer night. We want to do this summer success program. What do you have to have? You want to know what the gangsters ask for? You have to ask for permission. We live in their world. I know people don't like the idea of having a license to operate. They don't like asking for it. But we're not going to do a program that gets people killed. If you don't ask their permission, they will shut the program down. They will stop you from doing what you need to do. So your first thing has to be go in there and negotiate with the gangs to get their permission and their cooperation, which we did with Bo Taylor and a whole bunch of other guys. And Martin Ludlow told me, get in there and get their permission. You want to know what they wanted? They wanted jobs. They said, get me trained as a firefighter. So we got them into the firefighter. Another of them, when we would do they wanted their kids protected when they go to prison. They said, when I go to prison to do my life sentence, I need you to make sure my daughter gets to college. I mean, you know, they're actually pretty reasonable. Those are the ones we're sane. The ones that are crazy, you don't talk to, okay? And you got to know the difference. But that's why you have gang intervention. They know who's crazy and who isn't. I can actually tell because I've been around them a long enough time. So we negotiated that. Summer success, you want to know what the results were? Remember 17 murders in? 0 murders, 0 rapes. Juvenile crime plummeted to 0, okay? Every kid in that neighborhood was safe for that summer. The LA Times even wrote an editorial about, you know, success at last. So we took that model and said, expand it. Start with the public parks. So this summer, long story short, Summer Night Lights with Guillermo Cespedes as the gang czar, the Advancement Project, and a whole bunch of other agencies as his brain trust and his strategy center. We're the strategic people. We help them execute these things. We started a gang intervention academy, the city's first gang intervention academy. It's called La Vida in the city, but it's My Urban Peace Academy from the Advancement Project. It actually teaches and provides the faculty and the courses. So right now we're running the city's Gang Intervention Academy, training and professionalizing gang intervention to be able to work with cops. The violence stabilization stage is the first stage, remember? And then you go on to the norm change where you get to the cultural stuff. But the first step is to take back your public spaces in a non-confrontational way that doesn't make the gang stronger. And then what happened? Well, you go into these parks at 1 o'clock in the morning, people are packing up their picnic tables. You have skateboarding, you've got chess, you've got midnight soccer, so you're organizing, you feed close to 1,500 people every night in 24 parks. You hire 1,000 people. You organize the community for 24/7 activities. You give them a lot of rich alternatives. Guess what? When you create the stability and reduce the violence, the community changes its reaction to itself and to its ecosystem. And the community starts to make itself safer. We didn't do this. What we did is we created the space by giving them a little bit of investment, a little bit of support. It's like the doctors don't stop the disease, but they train and galvanize the community to stop the spread of the disease. Summer Night Lights galvanizes the community. They see the investment, and this is in a year where there's blood on the floor. They're taking people's pensions. This is in a depression. California doesn't have a recession, it's a depression, all right? And in these communities, we've had 40 years of depression, 50% unemployment, chronic violence, and so forth. So in a very, very difficult budget year, you have a mayor who said, I'm not cutting this. I'm not cutting the GRID office, the Gang Reduction and Youth Development Office, which was created as a result of our report. Not cutting it. And I'm going to expand it to 24 parks. Well, we thought that was nuts because we don't have enough people to do 24 parks, and we were just praying every night that no one would get stabbed or shot. But we got through the summer, and you want to know what the results were? Geometric change. I'd say we hit the transformative level. Not just transactional, not just personal service, transformation. Because in and around the parks of Summer Night Lights, and Georgia, I hope you circulated that article, guess what the drop in crime was? Gang crime around an average across all the 24 parks, only around and in the Summer Night Lights parks, did gang crime drop 37.8%. And that wasn't even the best stat. Gang homicide dropped, what was it, 57? 57%. Now, for those of you who don't like Hug-a-Thug, and don't give a damn about gangs and just want to lock them up and pretend they don't exist, or just, put them in Pelican Bay in isolation, and I talk to hardcore Attila the Hun Republicans all the time. It's half my family. I talk to them in terms of money. Okay? You have to read this new study that is being peer-reviewed right now. It's by the University of Iowa, but they pulled together a whole bunch of academicians, and they recalculated how to estimate the cost of crime. Because you've seen the studies that estimate the cost to the victims, right? You've seen the studies that estimate the cost of prosecution and DNA labs and the coroner's costs and all of the costs of the criminal justice system, right? I'm sure you've seen those calculations. And Sheriff Baca will talk about the gangs costing, gang murders costing $1 million a murder, right? Well, this is a new calculation because it calculates the cost to the victim, the loss of productivity. There's impact on the immediate family. When someone is murdered, you impact that whole family. The productivity goes up, so calculating all of the victim impact. And this study uniquely evaluates the cost of our response, our policy responses to crime, fear of crime. So all that prison building, all those 3 strikes laws, locking everybody up for stealing a jumpsuit. Don't laugh, that's a case. There's somebody serving life for stealing a jumpsuit. Which is why I backed Steve Cooley, but that's another lecture because he promised me that would not happen again and it did not. Bottom line is that the costs recalculated for the policy responses, which is a legitimate consideration because we sure as hell pile a lot of money into this system. $8 billion for corrections, and they come out more violent than they ever did. And Greg Boyle's the only one doing the rehabilitation. Don't even get me started. But the real costs, the actual costs, under this study for a non-gang homicide are $17 million per killing. That's a non-gang homicide. Why are gang homicides more expensive? Because they're retaliation shootings. That little 5-year-old in his Spider-Man suit who got murdered around Halloween Eve, as a that killing, that kind of killing can spark as many as 20 to 27. The highest number of retaliation shootings in a high-profile gang shooting was 27 retaliation killings. So they're usually a minimum of 5 to 10. In response to that shooting, gang intervention fanned out, stopped the rumors, calmed the community, went to the other gang and said, don't do it. And they prevented, Chief Gannon, LAPD, says that gang intervention actually, the guys that train in our academy and who actually run our academy, they fanned out and they prevented what Chief Gannon thinks is 21 retaliation shootings. So if a gang murder, let's have a conservative estimate. A non-gang murder, you have $17 million. A gang murder, they estimate can cost $100 million to $150 million to kill him because of the ripples, okay? So for people who don't give a damn about these kids and wish these communities didn't exist and make the Chamber of Commerce look bad, and, you know, Connie, you do hug a thug, and, you know, they don't know how hard I am on these guys. It's hardly hug a thug. They can't stand me most of the time. For those who don't want that argument, I give them the money argument. That program, the Summer Night Lights program, I estimate saved the city of Los Angeles $200 million this summer. And in a time when we ain't getting any more taxes from the public, that's the argument to go with. We can't afford to put $8 billion into a prison system that's ending up being MA headquarters for national gang and drug distribution. We are actually providing them with their headquarters. All right? How we can have a correction system that wastes that much money is beyond me, but we need to create a movement on that. So when Georgia and I get our initiatives together, we expect you to fan out and get the votes. All right? That's one function you all. You're part of the Army now. You're in Georgia's courses here. You're part of the Army. You understand? And don't have me come after you because you really don't want me. Georgia is reasonable. So, with stunning success like this, remember, you get all the sectors to get in the boat together. You have a strategy. You have a strategy. You offer activities. It's an alternation theory. Rather than attacking the gang directly, you're providing rich alternatives. And then you've got to reform the institutions so that the educational opportunities of these schools are nothing but dropout factories. That's the next. But you're looking at the ecosystem. And if the schools are a vector, you go in there and you have a vector control strategy for the schools. Then you get the county probation and all these other institutions. See, Georgia and I operate at the institutional level, not the individual family treatment level. Guillermo Cespedes believes very deeply in the family treatment. Well, family treatment doesn't last if you leave people in a shooting gallery. Okay? You have to have the systemic ecosystem strategies so that your individual human being treatment strategies, the social work and the treatment of the human beings, actually lasts and doesn't get destroyed by the vector of violence. You have to have both the systemic strategies as well as the individual strategies, and you link them. And you have to have the institutional strategies. Why? I know everybody loves 1,000 points of light. I'm one of them. So is Georgia. So are you. 1,000 points of light are great when you're in utter darkness. But 1,000 points of light can't ever replace the sun. If you do the analysis of the charitable sectors in this country, we hold about 20% of the resources that are needed to solve these problems. The government has 80%. As far as I'm concerned, if they got my money, I'm going to see results. I'm going to become conservative too, all right? I don't mind you taking my taxes, but you sure as hell better not be wasting. You better be solving some problems, like the proliferation of the gang epidemic. So, we are getting smarter strategies. Georgia and I are going to have to mount a campaign to force the city to understand it actually has a solution in front of it. They're not going to know it unless you cram it down their throats, because they're not used to looking outside of their little Dover cubicles, and they don't understand that they're supposed to be there to solve problems, not just wait for their pensions and take home the paycheck. When we interviewed Bridges, the LA Bridges program, Georgia and I, we about dropped our dentures. Neither of us really has dentures. The head of the LA Bridges program, which is the only program, the gang program that the city had, he actually told Georgia and me, oh, well, I don't talk to the gang members because I'm afraid of them. I said, you're a gang reduction, you're our gang reduction czar, and you're afraid of the gangsters? I said, what are you afraid of? I said, I'm around them all the time, and they actually, you know, I hire them to watch my car. Are you kidding? They're not going to shoot you. I said, they're not going to shoot you or me, because they need us, all right? The bottom line is that this public health model takes a number of the areas that you are studying right now and weaves them together into a safety net. Okay? Getting those strategies done in the real world is a pain in the you-know-what. You have to get people who are used to doing checkbox bureaucratic compliance to get creative and entrepreneurial and nimble and cooperative and collegial. It requires everybody to get in the boat, figure out whose strengths are what, and then you gotta kind of carry out a strategy with the local folks, because you can't come in top down. You have to negotiate with people on the ground to create a tailor-made solution for that set of neighborhoods. You have to negotiate with those gangsters to make sure that they get buy-in so they don't shoot the people in the park. That would have been a great headline, right? Summer night lights, people dead. I mean, I have nightmares, you know. The reason I have these bags under my eyes is we don't sleep in the summer because we're trying to demonstrate this strategy. We'll be demonstrating. And Georgia is helping to evaluate it and show what's working. What is working? So, what's the next threat? And then I'll take some questions. We are now trying to figure out how to deal with street gangs. Remember, prison gangs used to be something completely separate, and they are completely different. Sociology, etymology, they are a completely different animal. All right? Prison gangs are a completely different animal. But they are now connected to some street gangs. Used to be prison gangs are completely separate from cartels, completely separate from lower level organized crime, completely separate from street gangs. And then, of course, you've got all of the wannabes, the skateboard crews, the party crews. You could do a great graphic of all of the different organized juvenile delinquency to organized crime, okay? You got to know which category you're talking about because the culture and the physics and the dynamics of each of these different entities or ways of organizing young people to get power, which is what a gang really is, the vehicle for getting power. Once you analyze which area you're in, used to be they were separate, but now the prison gangs actually control a number of the street gangs as part of their drug distribution. The skateboard crews are now kind of feeder teams for some of the gangs, but you've got to analyze each situation because it's easy for, if you listen to cops, every kid in a pair of baggy pants is a gangster, right? So you've got to be able to make these distinctions for strategic reasons because what you do with a party crew can be very different from what you do with a hardcore, deeply attached, entrenched gangster who is killed. When you've got a kid who is troubled, in fact, you use a different kind of psychiatry. We also had psychiatrists on our team. You don't use youth delinquency and troubled, at-risk youth counseling. When you're dealing with a hardcore gang member, guess what kind of psychiatrist you have to go to? You have to go to a cult deprogrammer, which is pretty fascinating. The level of, so you even choosing the right kind of doctor, choosing the right kind of social support strategy if you're in social work about gangs, okay? And I'm looking at, I'm also doing the threat assessment. I do this through threat assessment. I've been with the cops too long. I sued them for 18 years, but I now have my own parking space at LAPD headquarters. And I have a badge. I've gone to the dark side because I found that when you have a police chief standing beside you, the politicians are afraid of you. And the cops are critical to the first phase of a wraparound model, which is what? Stabilize and reduce the violence. If you don't have the police with you, and they're acting like outlaws themselves, that's why I spent 18 years trying to get the police to get back inside the Constitution instead of acting like they're in some Third World War torn country. So, I said, where do you think we are? East Germany? So when we took a look at this, I'm looking at it now more and more through the threat assessment. So while we're getting these wraparound strategies, getting the youth gang, the youth reduction and youth development and gang reduction office out of the blocks, and doing the summer night light strategy and documenting the geometric impact that it has by making the community safe enough to protect itself and to embrace all of their kids and to give them enough activities and rich alternatives that you can actually demonstrate that this model works. That's what we just did this summer. Georgia and all of us together demonstrated our theory in that big report. It's taken 4 years. But unfortunately, the problem doesn't stand still. And what's next, and what I'm fearing, is that because our gangs, we can't seem to get enough resources and enough critical mass to try these strategies beyond the summer night lights area, we're falling behind in terms of the threats. What's the new threat? Well, the new threat is that our street gangs will slowly be taken over by transnational players, meaning cartels and even worse than that. In the unincorporated areas of LA, there was a headline in La Opinion. If you don't read La Opinion, you don't know what's going on in the city. The LA Times has a very myopic view and it has one set of views. But if you don't read L'Opinion, it's like a tale of two cities when I look at it. And then you look at the Korean papers. I can't read Korean, but I get them. We have a number of Korean speakers in our office. You got to get the range of newspapers to see what's being covered and how. And there were, about 4 months ago now, there was a headline in the L'Opinion, Los Zetas ya están en Los Angeles. Big deal for L'Opinion to take up covering the drug cartels in Mexico, because the journalists in Mexico can no longer cover those issues without getting killed. So what the L'Opinion did is they picked up the baton, and they're now covering not just the violence in Mexico. We act like we're not tethered to Mexico. This used to be the northern territories of Mexico. We don't understand, this is Calexico, whether we like it or not. And we act like Mexico is, in New Zealand somewhere. Well, guess what? The Zetas are here. Sinaloa is here. But they're not just here. They're in every American city. We already knew that. That's not the news, because they've been operating the drug distribution networks forever throughout most of our major. So we knew that they were doing their drug distribution through every major city. What we didn't know is that they are now starting to operate on the streets through street gangs in LA. Okay? That's the new move. And when did that happen? Just the last 18 months. So Sinaloa is now commensurate and identified as taken over Florencia 13. Once that happens, and Washington, they're gonna panic. Instead of doing 3 cups of tea counterinsurgency, which is community building and investment and the wraparound strategies, the military version of it is what we're supposed to be trying to do in Afghanistan and haven't quite managed to do in Iraq. But the community building strategies are the 3 cups of tea counterinsurgency. And if you think we don't have an insurgency, we brought out Defense Intelligence Agency experts who evaluated the gang situation in LA. And they said what you have is a sustained parasitic incipient insurgency. And your tactical responses to it are not going to stop it. That's from the counterinsurgency experts. So the next level of analysis, for me, is a military level of analysis. But in the meantime, our mission is to make every single kid, whether they're in a gang or not, they have the right to safety and the right to thrive. In these zones, and I'll leave you with this thought, understand that we can never be safe if 7 to 8 miles east and south of us, there are communities where children suffer post-traumatic stress levels that are higher than our troops coming home from Fallujah. 90% of the children in these gang zones, and this is the epidemiologist data, 90% of the children in these gang zones are chronically exposed to violence. That's what produces 33% post-traumatic stress at Civil War levels. And the 25% of the teachers in these areas have post-traumatic stress at Civil War levels. You can't have areas where law doesn't operate and where cartels can buy nightclubs and restaurants and start to have happen what happened in Italy. 7% of Italy's GDP belongs to the Italian mafia. 7% of the national GDP. So Italy's strategy was to simply accommodate and assimilate their gang, their organized crime, and just hand part of the country over. If we want to go to the road to Palermo, we can ignore these areas, ignore these epidemics, and not find a wise and smart strategy that doesn't create a whole bunch of mayhem and blood. We don't use the public health model. We're going to let these gang zones get hotter and hotter. Guess who comes in to take over because government isn't working? So if we're not there, we've just handed the people over to organized crime, cartels, and the gangs. That's what we do. And if you don't think that those hot spots won't metastasize and come into our neighborhoods, I've got some very sad news for you. It will happen. So, we need you to get your degrees. We need you to master all of these different areas. And notice, we cut across areas. Just because she's an anthropologist doesn't mean she hasn't learned the law. Okay? Just because you're going into social work doesn't mean you shouldn't understand how cops think. That's what liberal arts means. It's holistic. These strategies are holistic, comprehensive public health strategies. Multiple disciplines, multiple sectors. It's cross-silo thinking, strategy, and execution to get results that are comprehensive and holistic and not just transactional with a one-point jump. You're not just moving the meter, you're transforming the entire system. All right? That's what our enterprise is. That's our approach to gangs, and I will leave you with that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
questions, comments? Speak up.
Hi, I'm Kyra. I'm a senior here at UCLA. I'm from Los Angeles. I went to Washington Preparatory High School right in the heart of LAUSD. One thing that a lot of people keep saying, like, you need to get your education, you need to get your degree so that you can come back and do this, but like, how do you fight that when, for example, we're having fee increases here and people from my community are getting kicked out of UCLA because they can't pay their raise? Like, we can't even get our education here. So like, how do we go back to our communities and tell them, well, I kind of had to drop out because I don't have money right now? It's just like, how do you, what are you supposed to bring back to them to let them know, like, I don't know, it's really hard.
Don't let the fights over the cost of the education derail you. Figure out how to finance it. You'll pay it back. Don't worry about it. You'll pay it back. I mean, and it's very difficult for young people now, because when I was coming up, if you did certain things in a certain sequence, you were guaranteed access to jobs. That's no longer the case. So you're going to have to do a different evaluation about the steps that you take. Getting a BA from UCLA is worth the cost, okay? So you can find a way to finance it. Get the financial aid. If you can't get the grants, go to the 100 black men and make them give you some money. You know, there's a way to get this financed. Don't get derailed by fights over fees. Keep your eye on getting your degree. Keep your eye on learning what your courses are teaching you. And even if you don't get this degree, the fact that you're here means you're more than smart enough to go back to that community and help them. So, you also don't, I mean, the degree is a credential, but you're here because you know how to think at that strategic level. You're in this school because you already have the skills that it takes. This degree is kind of like a confirmation. They're giving you a lot more content. They're giving you strategic constructs, frameworks, through which you can analyze a situation and figure out a solution. That's what your liberal arts is supposed to do. Doesn't mean you're a master of all of these areas. It means that complexity, intensity, large-scale problems don't deter you. And what you're really doing is you are reverse engineering solutions. You're analyzing the problem, you're understanding enough about its different aspects that you can then say, okay, to take care of this, I gotta have this, 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 and this. And it's very much like what the JPL engineers do. I asked the question, how in the world did they land 9 pieces of metal on Mars? Do you have any idea how hard that is? It's like hitting a hole-in-one on Mars from the Earth. It should not be possible. So I decided to go and get Gentry Lee, and I said, okay, you're one of the smartest people on the planet, you and Stephen Hawking. Tell me how you do this, because I need to apply it to the social human being areas, because we're stuck on stupid there. I don't know what we're doing. We're just not doing what we need to do. And he told me how you case, analyze each aspect, each phase, and then first of all you set your goal, and then you reverse engineer all of the entities and institutions and individuals that you need. One of the most important skills you're going to have in this work is the political acumen. You would be stunned by the egos. Part of why we can't get anything done is not just the egos of the politicians. You got the egos of the gang intervention workers, you got the egos of the academics. Georgia and I almost shot ourselves in the head when we tried to organize the PhDs. They're the worst of all. You got to organize the egos of the cops, the politics of policing. They have to answer to their civilian bosses. You really have to have somebody in your team. If you're not good at this, you got to have somebody on your team who can instantly analyze the political stuff, because that's the stuff that stops you. You could have the cure to AIDS and they'll stop it because it doesn't get them elected. So, or some academic doesn't want their opponent, to get credit for something, and they want to have the cure. You'd be stunned. So understand you've got to have a political acumen as well. But you don't have to have all these skills rolled in one. I certainly don't. I'm certainly not the warm, fuzzy type that does the social interaction. I'm asocial, and I don't really like people. So I don't do the one-on-one socializing. I'm not doing the dinners, and I don't fellowship, and no, I'm not going to lunch with you, so just don't even ask. I've got my limitations, you've got yours, but I have people on my staff who are very good at that. So don't worry, but don't get wrapped around that stuff. Keep your eye on the prize and get your degree, and you'll pay for it. Yes, sir.
Do you think gangs see themselves as a social sickness?
No, they see themselves as heroes. They see themselves as, I had to tell one of them, you're not Robin Hood, you're Blackbeard. So just cut the crap. you know, think about what it takes to be a gangster. You got to be a narcissist, first of all. All of us have a little bit of narcissism, but you got to have an ego that's bigger than the Pentagon building to think you ought to be running around with AK-47s and, you know, forcing people to do stuff that they don't want to do. So you got to think about that. But I recognize you have the same kind of mentality heading corporations. Now, you know, it's a personality type and an outlook, and it's mainly male, although the girls in gangs, I think I'm going to come back to that lecture, because the sociology of the girls, it used to be that most of the girls who were attached to gangs were just the sexual toys and boy toys, you know. They were just there as social supporters. But now you've got gangs that are headed by girls, and I encountered my first lesbian, African-American lesbian gang. Their initiation rite was to kill a man. Okay, so the girls are starting to morph into the same mentality, and here's the thing. I'm an ardent feminist. They call me the Black Murphy Brown. You probably never even heard of Murphy Brown, but I'm every man's worst nightmare. Just ask my ex-husband. I really am. I mean, I'm quite sure there's a superior gender and that I'm a member of it, and that's my bias, and I have to compensate for it and make sure I treat men properly, because I'm a female chauvinist. I'm a total female chauvinist, and I just have to, everybody has biases. Just understand what your biases are and compensate for them, okay? Ain't none of us perfect. I'm a civil rights lawyer, and I've got biases, so I know all you have, okay? Bottom line is that even a feminist understands that when you take the men out of a community, that community dies. We have, through our mass incarceration strategy, we have removed all the men. And we're locking up people, 70% of whom are in there for nonviolent crimes. And if you go on this campus and USC's campus, all y'all would have been in under 3 strikes with all the marijuana, smoking, cocaine. It's snowing on these campuses. Ain't nobody being arrested, and ain't nobody doing 3 strikes, okay? All right, so let's be honest about what this is. We have a mass incarceration strategy that is a direct descendant of our slave control strategy. You just need to understand that, all right? For those of you studying criminology, there's some great articles. Read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. We have a new Jim Crow, all right? That completely disenfranchises entire sectors of males. If you lose the men from a community, the family structure disintegrates, the socialization of your males goes down the tank, and we get what we see. And it spawns gangs, right? It spawns not just gangs, it spawns the disintegrate. If you lose the women in a community, so if you lose the men, you kill the community. If you lose the women, you've lost your civilization. We can't have the girls going down this road. The girls are part of the solution. Because if the girls are socialized to reject men who behave this way, guess what? 95% of them will leave the gang. Because they all want sex. Okay? Right? That's part of the that's part of the strategies. That's a strategy that Georgia and we wrote about in our big gang report. We said explore these strategies. We need to get out of the Dilbert cubicles. We need to explore these strategies. Okay? So the girls in the gangs, you got to tape that one for me, because we've got to get far more sophisticated. There are a lot of these things you do indirectly. You don't attack the gang. You find the sociological threads and you pull them and you unravel it. Yes, ma'am.
I, like you, I'm from Los Angeles. I'm from South Central. I watched people join gangs one by one. So just from my own, and I knew there were larger things at play, but just from my life experience, I thought about gang joining as a one-on-one thing. And so now here as a social work student, I'm a micro student, that means I want to do one-on-one work. Is there something that I can do, and it's my personality type, I'm just a one-on-one person, is there something that I can do in my one-on-one work to help with the intervention process?
Absolutely.
Young men, yeah.
Absolutely, and she said 2 very important things. I'm good at one-on-one. The most important thing you can figure out is what makes your heart beat faster, what's your passion, and what are your limitations. Okay? The reason I'm good at what I do is because I don't care if I'm invited to the Christmas party. In fact, I hope I'm not. I don't particularly care about belonging. I don't give a damn that people say don't invite Connie Rice. It's not worth going to if they're not smart enough to invite me anyway. Right? I like the fact that Georgia had those experiences. So I know what my skills are, I know what my strengths are, and I know what my deficits are. You said you like the individual to figure out at what level you are comfortable at and what really gets your juices going. You need to be passionate about what you do. Life is too short not to be passionate, all right? I'm too passionate. I'm not suggesting you get maladjusted like me, but find something that you really care about and want to do. And find the level at which you feel good. Hi, Kevin. Kevin Reed, stand up. He was my partner at NAACP Legal Defense Fund. He's now your general counsel. I adore Kevin, and I'm godmother to both of his sons. I've just decided I'm going to extend it to Zeke as well. So your individual level is critical. I'm talking about the systemic catapulting us out of our stupidity, right? And so we're looking at, but you have to do systems analysis. Just because you're doing systems analysis, you're doing systems analysis to figure out where the individual strategies work best, okay? The individual strategies are part of the larger set of strategies, all right? And both are needed. My systemic analysis, what Georgia and I are trying to force the county to change, and so can't work if you don't have the individual counseling, the individual family treatment. You know, all of that is critically important. The individual, the salvation of the human beings. And Greg will talk to you about hope, and he will talk to you about, you know, the individual stories of how he's taken the hardest core gangsters and turned them back into human beings, and how he believes in it. And it is absolutely critical. I would go to the ends of the world to make sure that Greg Boyle got, and we still arm wrestle about it. He doesn't like what we do, but, you know, we know that if you don't get the systemic stuff right, the individual stuff doesn't last very long. It's like my cases. I love my cases, but I was sending my clients back to shooting galleries and to schools that could teach the sculptured poodles in Beverly Hills how to bark. Right? So if I'm not thinking about, you know, litigation, you think that that would be big enough. But it wasn't enough. Now, I needed to do a systems analysis. Why weren't my cases making more impact? Well, it's because we're just in the courtroom, and the courtroom doesn't have the span to touch community dynamics, doesn't have the span to change cultural outlooks, doesn't have the span to deal with gangs. Unless it's through a case, and it's too limited, okay, too transactional. So to get to the transform, doesn't mean you have to carry it off. Don't worry, I'm not saying you guys have to become, you know, thank God there's like one every 10 million of people like me, otherwise, you know, we'd have a war. But bottom line is that figure out what makes you passionate, figure out what you're good at. Are you good on the one-on-one level? Or are you like a monk and you'd rather just write policy papers? If you just want to do the academic stuff, that's fine too. You know, so figure out at what level you want to do. Did I answer the other part of the question? What was the other part of the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's important, and I just insert in that just the one-on-one work. And it will really help understand what they call him Father George said about
Father Greg.
And Father Greg, sorry. Hope and salvation of the community.
Yes, hope and salvation. Listen, let me tell you something. Even in intervention, I've never seen an effective intervention worker who didn't do a spiritual transformation first. Those are the only guys and women I trust. They are atoning. They are about redemption. Okay? Those are the only ones that I've learned to trust. And it's only after 10 years, because they'll go back to the crime in a minute. So you can't really depend on that. But without the redemption, without the atonement, without the spiritual transformation, you can't work with intervention. Yes, sir?
Good afternoon. My name is Karume James. I'm an alumni, also an organizer with Community Coalition. And I wanted to actually ask you about where you see the future of the violence reduction and public health strategy within the city, especially given the fact that it's really institutionalized under the progressive bloc of the Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa's administration. And so now that his term is going to be ending soon, where do you see that actually going in the future?
Yeah, we're working on it. Let me put it this way. Part of the political acumen, you start to realize you got to choose some of these leaders. And let me put it this way. It was not by accident that we have Chief Beck now. Let me put it that way. That's part of the strategy. And so I think that with the success of Summer Night Lights, Georgia's evaluation of another set of programs in the South area that have shown the value of these tools, the value of creating these armies of gang intervention workers, the value of having the cops go from warrior policing to community policing. We're starting to get some evaluation that gives us political weapons to say, are you really going to dismantle this program that produced a 57% drop in gang homicides? What, are you on crack? if you begin to get the political insulation so that they can't roll the program back, which is what they will do because they didn't create it, they didn't control it, and it's taken money out of their pockets. We took $19 million out of the district budgets and gave it to the new gang czar. And it created all kinds of backstabbing and counter-subterfuge. And we spent 3 years fighting politicians who wanted to get the control of that money back because they were angry at the mayor for getting the $19 million. They didn't give a damn about the kids dying. They're fighting political battles over some paltry $19 million. They raised $20 million to spend on the damn elephants. That new pachyderm enclosure, I love elephants. But I hate zoos. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, that's one of my biases. I hate it. When I was 5 and they took me to the zoo, I packed a toolbox to get back to the zoo to free the lion in the cage because I knew that lion didn't belong in the cage. I hate zoos, all right? But this city spends more on zoos than it does on keeping its kids safe. Now that's a budget problem. Another aspect of this, fight for the money. We're not getting any more taxes out of the public. Making this money go further. I told you about the cost of the victims. Make the arguments in terms of how, not just the amount of money saved, but making sure that the money goes to the right kinds of solutions. That's also part of the strategy. You gotta know, you gotta have somebody on your team who knows how to do the budget. So we've got to pick the next mayor. We gotta make it a third rail issue. If people think that the grid office is a good format, then fine. If not, we'll create a new one. But the dedication to focusing on this in the right way with the right strategies is what we're after.
We have time for one more question. One more question.
I can't tell who had their hand up. Yes, sir.
As you look around the country, or perhaps even internationally, do you see anything that approaches a best practices strategy? Something aside from the terrific work you folks are doing, or somewhere else? New York, San Francisco, Paris, something.
Well, we see aspects of it. But the problem with looking at other areas is that nobody has anything close to our scale. We're at a third world level. Chicago is our closest competitor in terms of violence, but they're a distant second. And they do not have the saturation of gangs. And gangs don't control the amount of turf. In New York, because it's a vertical city, you just have a different set of problems. But I'll tell you, Jeffrey Kennedy, who did that brilliant Harlem Children's Zone strategy, he couldn't have done that in LA. MA would never let him get control of a 42-block area. It would not have happened. So we're unique. We're uniquely intense. We have a unique level of scale. We've got 4,000 square miles. If you count all of Southern California, it's 30 million people. So you know, but there are aspects. You have very effective violence interruption from ceasefire in Chicago, Alameda County. Part of what we did in our report was we traveled all around the country and gathered all of the wraparound strategies around the country. Alameda County, the 10-point plan in Boston. You know, you go to Baltimore. There's a new program there. Newark has had something that was a little bit small, but it was a few square blocks. So you've got different educational focused strategies, public health focused strategies, and they've been collected in our analysis. It's a little bit old now, but yes, there are examples of other communities that have tried aspects, but we have to do it all because we're at an epidemic level. Remember, no fly swatters for malaria. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.